because it'd be pretty unfair to the public to 1 month say, okay, we're done. I would like to give them a year or two warning that we're getting to that point, and some information out in the press that that's happening if possible.
Another possible option is not to close the class, but make all production subject to replacement water assessment within the 3 acre. So if you qualify as an unknown small pumper under the judgment, you're in, but there's going to have to be replacement water even for that small pumper production. It's just another option instead of closing the class. Tell Judge Helmar, the class stays open, but we've got to have replacement water going forward.
Yeah, and even if we, and I actually was thinking that's what we would probably do, but even if we do that, I really want the public to have a long warning before that would occur. So, thank you.
So right now, we think we have around 6,000. If we cleaned up that list, it could be 5,500 or something. So the ones we've approved could still be under the 6,000 number.
That's a possibility. So I think Patty's through the H's, and I just prefer not to speculate until we can just get through. I mean, this is a lot of work. We had pieces coming into this, but there was no opportunity that we've had to put everything together. And it's difficult to tell unknown small pumpers, you know, hold off, you know, we're not interested in approving you, when we're not even 100% sure exactly what our Exhibit C parties are producing. So I think if we could just move through that process and figure that out. I mean, what you said is theoretically correct. I just don't know what the numbers are right now.
But they're not required to meet anything.
That, as long as the watermaster engineer is required to inspect to make sure that the pumping is within the maximum 3 acre feet a year, and if the indications are that they're pumping more than 3 acre feet a year, then that triggers a contact and possible metering.
Yeah, they're not required to meter, but if there's a reasonable belief they're in excess of 3 acre feet, and that will be in my report about our contact with the small pumpers.
Can I ask a question?
Very good. Sure, Mr. Whitson. Come to the mic and state your name, please.
Yes, it's not, did I hear you say you think there might be as many as 6,000?
Well, there are that many entries on the Exhibit C list.
That many entries on the
Yes.
Exhibit C list?
Yes, and we know that Exhibit C has some duplication in names, so we're trying to get through that list to make sure that we understand exactly how many there are.
We're going to have to talk about 6,000 is news to me. That was actually that many on the list?
Yes, you can look at Exhibit C in the judgment.
All right. Something wrong there.
Thank you. Okay, we're on resolution number R1828. Is there a motion to approve that resolution? Motion made by Dennis, second by John. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion's carried unanimously. We're now on item B, proposed and revised forms, consideration and possible action to approve the proposed storage agreement for banking and recovery. And Phyllis?
Thank you. So as part of the rules and regulation, this board approved the storage agreement regulations, and in response to that, we've put together a preliminary draft form to list out the information required for a storage agreement that mirrors what we have in the rules and regulations. And so this is the first time that the advisory committee had an opportunity to see this, and the first time that the boards had an opportunity to see this. And we appreciate the advisory committee's comments and welcome any additional board comments so that we can keep this process moving to get this form in place. We would like to be able to do this by the end of the year, because we would like to be able to start all of the reporting as we move into 2019.
Discussion? Has this form gone through the advisory committee yet?
Yes, this last time, and in their packet, that was one of the questions that I had earlier.
Right,
In the packet they have.
That's what I thought, so you ready for your question?
So I guess one of the things that we will need to do is to figure out the right protocol for working directly with the advisory committee so that we can make sure that we understand the comments and are appropriately getting them into the storage agreement forms. We have budget issues, as you know, so one of my great ideas for saving budget was not to attend the advisory committee meetings, but now I'm in the position of needing to hear from them directly so that I can better understand their comments.
Phyllis, could you explain to me how the recovery will be dealt with? I mean, when it's time to recover this water, it's going to depend on where it's being recovered at, part of the valley, from the upper or lower aquifer, which I do personally believe there's two aquifers in this valley. How do you deal with that at this point?
So there is a requirement for material injury analysis, which is why we have our bullet list here on the application for the information. This is going to be done, I would envision, in a variety of ways, and I was trying to think about the most flexible process that we could have in the basin so that we can encourage storage agreements to occur. Recovery could potentially be at the banking project from recovery wells. But I also think that we would also want to allow some flexibility on that recovery could be from other areas in the basin. We do have to think about whether or not recovery in other areas would result in material injury, and that's part of this analysis.
Thank you.
Phyllis, you saw the advisory committee comments. Can you just comment, kind of go through 1 through 5 and give us your comments regarding those?
Yes.
There might be more than 5. 1 through 7, excuse me.
Yes, and again, this is my reading of them, so if I'm misunderstanding something, I certainly welcome additional input and comments. The first comment was that the carryover into storage is not covered on this form. That's exactly right. That was done on purpose. We don't really need that form for at least 6 more years. I'm trying to prioritize what we do. And I also don't think that, other than documentation, the storage agreement for carryover water is going to be anywhere near this complex. I mean, this is water that is allowed to be produced under the judgment. It was carried over for some time. It was not produced, therefore it is still in storage to the benefit of the basin. So I just don't see the need at this point in making a very simplified form for something that isn't going to be needed for a few more years. But if people feel like that that's a high priority, of course I'm open to listening to that.
And Phyllis, a quick question on carryover probably isn't the right place, but at some point we're going to, and probably in our annual report, we will show how much carryover water is in storage, who has it, and so we're going to be able to keep a running total of where it is, who has it, and then when they use it, then.
Absolutely, and are already doing that now in the 2017 report.
Great, thank you.
The second comment here is the suggestion that this form is both an application and an approval form. Yes, that's right. We thought that was clever so that we could cut down on the number of forms. What I see happening is this form being a front page, a little bit of a table of contents for the storage agreement. So it is the page of approval. Obviously, we're not going to have parties sign this form until the storage agreement material has been done The analysis has been made, it's been brought back to the board, and the board has either approved it or not. So it seems to us that having an additional form for approval is fine, but it just didn't seem necessary. So that was my thinking there. There was some concern about the $5,000 flat fee. So let's talk about that for a second. Because a banking project is going to be potentially influencing the aquifer and producing a larger aquifer response than pretty much anything else that we've been doing associated with this adjudication, the material injury analysis will be a little more complex. So the high price associated with the application process covers the ability to go through extensive hydrogeological and hydrological studies that are being done associated with the storage projects, and make sure that we understand the technical information that's being provided, and also to give us an opportunity to comment on the CEQA process as you had suggested previously, and that we also follow that CEQA process along. So that's really the reason for the additional cost here. The suggestion actually indicated that perhaps some people thought it might actually cost more, and they were suggesting that a deposit and actual time spent by the watermaster engineer dealing with the application in there, that would be another way to do it, and if you prefer to do that, that would be fine. I was trying to give the applicants some certainty so that they wouldn't think they were signing a blank check, so to speak, for the analysis. And I also assumed that because these storage agreements, I believe, will be to the benefit of the basin, I assumed that there would be a shared cost between the watermaster and our typical annual budget and the applicants for the storage agreements. So that was my thinking. I put that out there because that was what I thought made sense, but obviously open to anything else that the board would like to do.
When we're talking about storage agreements, they can be from 1,000 acre feet to 1,000,000 acre feet, right?
Correct.
And some are going to be more complex than others.
Agreed, agreed. And so if that thought process, I'm understanding you, you're suggesting that maybe it would make more sense to do it on a, have the cost be more on a per project basis.
I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I think that'd be my preference, because if it's a large commercial operation, obviously they can afford more than if it's a smaller operation. And once you get into a few of the large operations, a lot of the work, I would imagine, is going to be done. So getting a deposit and doing an hourly would seem to be sensible, but I see Dwayne's gearing up to talk, so what's your thoughts?
I concur, especially with these types of projects. They can vary in size and scope. So I believe that's appropriate. The other thing for the board to realize is that all the usury fees that are associated with this have to be documented through an independent study of what the actual costs are. We don't have enough information to be able to do that study. We haven't done enough of them, and we haven't created the form yet. But I think a deposit and actual costs, especially for the larger expenses, would seem to be appropriate and would automatically allow us to be compliant with the requirements that all of our usury fees be consistent with the time spent.
It seems when you say a deposit, it could be like a retainer where you take it and as you use it, at some point you have it replenished if it's going to be more, or if you're done, you send back the balance. And that would be a fair process.
Fairly standard practice.
I think I'm still trying to understand how this is going to be implemented. So let's say someone wants to store 1,000 acre feet of imported water supply. Is that where the 5,000 comes in, or, and then let's say I store it, it takes 4 months to do that, and then I stop, and then the following year I want to do another 1,000 acre feet. Do I have to buy that pay the 5,000 again?
No, so it just depends on, I think all of these projects will vary, and there may be that kind of an ongoing process. It seems to me that once recharge basins are built or whatever other storage options we have, then that's an asset that could be used in a variety of ways. And so it seems to me that there is a project proponent that has the storage area, and that there may be opportunities for third parties to store in that area, but that the storage agreement would always be with the project proponent. And so that we can vary the rules and regulations that we've written allow for a lot of flexibility. So the project could be, we're going to operate in this method generally, conceptually, and then every year, here are the details of what we're going to do. We have built into this form a request that the watermaster engineer be notified of when there is new recovery being planned and how that's going to happen, and that come to us before the recovery actually begins. Usually, the material injury analysis is going to be associated with recovery rather than recharge, and as a result of that, we can keep up with this over time. We are required to keep up with the volumes and report on the operations in the annual report, so we need that information anyway for that. That was the reason for including some of the dates that we have on our form. So, I am assuming that this board would like to be as flexible as possible to allow for as much water to come into the basin as possible. And so we were envisioning a process whereby the project proponent would propose conceptually how the project would be operated, and then if there were changes in that operation, it would just be a matter of amendments.
So why can't we just require the project owner to do hydrogeological analysis and investigation and submit it to the watermaster board for approval? In other words, granted, if it's a small operation, maybe that's inappropriate, in which case then the watermaster can charge the 5,000 or whatever it is. But let's say, you have AVEP, where they have a huge bank, or the other bank now, Willow Spring or whatever it is.
Yes.
And they would store, whatever, 15,000, 50,000, or whatever, recover that much.
Right.
I think it would be more appropriate for agencies like that. And then similarly, Water District 40 or Palm Water District, or anybody wants to do the same thing. They have the resources and the ability to do whatever the watermaster believe is necessary to perform the material injury analysis and understand what is going to happen to the basin, either through storage or extraction. Do the analysis and submit that analysis to the watermaster board, and the watermaster board can charge a review fee. That's a lot easier to assess what it would be. You're reviewing a professional groundwater hydrology report that is done by a registered hydrologist or groundwater hydrologist. Then it's easy to say, okay, well, it's going to take us 15 hours or 20 hours, and we'll charge X amount of dollars per hour, so we're going to charge you $5,000. Appropriate. In that case, we don't have to ask for a deposit. We don't really know how much it is, because some of those banks, and who knows, we could see groundwater banks in the Antelope Valley. We have whatever, $68 million acre feet of storage, so we could have huge banking operation goes here in the valley.
I am anticipating that the $5,000 is for review of material
okay.
injury
Then
analysis
I missed that part.
that was done for others. Obviously, we're trying to get this form to be as flexible and as, serve as many purposes as we can have it serve. The one thing we would like to do is to get storage agreements with pre-existing banking projects first. All that work has been done. And so it's just a matter, because we're responsible for the material injury analysis, I need to be able to see the technical information that shows the backup for that. And I have no doubt that it exists, and that, it is a matter of reviewing it and documenting it and reporting back to you our findings. So, that's really the first step in all of this process, is to get what has been done in the basin. And I think that as we move through the storage agreements for the pre-existing banking projects, which I anticipate will be relatively straightforward, that will begin to teach us what we need to be thinking about for new storage agreements in the future.
Do we have a number of pre-existing banks in the valley? I mean, it can't be hundreds, is it?
No, of course not, and, you know, I know of about 5. The judgment requires that we not alter operations of pre-existing projects, but it doesn't actually list the projects, it lists the parties that are the project proponents, so to speak. And so,
But to store water, you're going to have to be in a banking project. You can't just have an AVAC turnout and dump it in your reservoir and all of a sudden you're a storage guy.
well,
What was it?
The one that they used to farm out of.
That's still storage.
No, but I mean, do you have to be a bank to store, or can you be a store without a bank? And if you can, where are you going? What's going to qualify as a store?
you have to have a storage agreement. But I don't see any reason why you have to have a formal, you know, recharge basin project. If you can show that you can get the water in the ground, then that's what we're going to be looking at. And if you can show that to recover that water will not be material injury, then obviously that's another thing that we need to look at. So I think that the storage agreement form as we have right now is very flexible. It simply says, please describe your project to us. Please tell us what the sources of water are, the quantity and the quality. Tell us how you're going to put it in the basin. Tell us how you're going to recover it. And that does not preclude that you have a massive formal banking project at all.
Speaking of quality, does the Ohio Regional Board get involved?
Yeah, so that, we'll just skip to that if you'd like. I'm going through these advisory committee comments and on page 2. I'm sorry.
Just go through the comments in order and then we'll speak.
Okay, all right, that sounds great. So we have responded to 1 through 3. Number 4 says, it is unclear how a party can store water in a third party's groundwater banking facility in the proposed form, and the answer is that a storage agreement is with the project proponent. And if you want to store water in a banking, an existing banking with an existing storage agreement, then you work with the project proponent to do that. And if the project proponent feels that that is massively changing their operations, then they would come back to the watermaster engineer to notify us, and we would look that over and say, great, that doesn't look like material injury, we'll report that back to the watermaster board, and you will have an opportunity to know that the operations are changing, so to speak. Number 5 is the what I was actually asking Derek about, and I don't know if he can qualify or if somebody else can qualify this. The comment from the advisory committee states, the process, information, and conditions, referring to the form, appear to overstep the authority described in section 18.5.14 of the judgment.
Derek, just state your name before you go on.
Derek Urosic, Vice Chair of the Advisory Committee. I do not recall who that is. I'm trying to be a look after you asked that question. If anybody is in
It's
the
an
advisory
attachment
committee.
of Stan Powell's letter. Stan, I think, isn't that yours, the last
Well,
paragraph?
I have some written comments, but the advisory committee also had discussion. So all of the points that Phyllis is going through were not covered in my written. I don't recall making a comment about authority to do it.
Okay, good, thanks.
I apologize, but I think it may have come from our technical advisor, Mr. Rotman. But I would ask, maybe I will follow up with him and double check that.
That'd be great, thank you. Comment number 6 says that the termination provision under agreement conditions and terms has no guidelines for why termination would occur or a hearing process to have the ability to dispute the findings. I agree it does not, and so perhaps we need to be clearer in the rules and regulations. I think that's really the place for this kind of a thing rather than on the form. And so I've made a note to myself, remember, we're all going to have another bite at the apple for the rules and regulations. So I think that this makes sense to add back to the rules and regulations. And just in case people would like an answer now, I mean, obviously it would be associated with the material injury analysis if we find that in the future operations are having unanticipated consequences that are detrimental to the basin or producers, then that would be a reason for considering at least changing operations. Termination feels very final, but at any rate, that would be the process that we're referring to there. And then comment number 7 says that there are concerns about controls on water quality of stored water and how this process works with Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board, a question that just came up. And I know that we appreciate AVEC's comments on the rules and regulations for the storage agreements. That was also something that we talked about at the time. So we wanted to make sure that the rules and regulations make it clear that we're not adding any kind of new form of level of additional regulatory requirements here. Obviously, we respect the regulatory agencies that are already looking at water quality and anti-degradation from the point of view of the state of California, and it would simply be a matter of making sure that we have understood what has been said by the regulators, and that's incorporated into the conditions of the storage agreement. But we're not anticipating that we would do a brand new and different somehow water quality assessment.
Just a follow-up on Phyllis. Let's say just hypothetically that the land board is unaware of a nitrate plume somewhere, and then your material injury analysis shows that you could pull that plume into an area where you don't want it to be instead of containing it. Don't you think we have a responsibility to make sure that that doesn't happen because we want to protect the water quality of the basin?
Yes, and in your hypothetical, I think a lot of that would come out with respect to the CEQA process that's going to occur associated with the storage agreements. If not, and I know about it, obviously you're going to know about it.
Okay.
So I just, I'm trying to balance my responsibility to do a material injury analysis with the concerns of project proponents who feel like now they have another whole step that they have to go through.
And I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. It just that my experience shows that in areas now we're detecting nitrate, and they're, as you know, a major concern to drinking water, and we want to make sure that we stay contained and not being pulled all over the groundwater basin.
And I feel like that's my responsibility to make sure that that doesn't happen. Thank you. And then there were additional comments by Stan Powell, and I think it might be probably time best well spent for me to work directly with Stan Powell on those comments rather than go through all of them here, but I'll do whatever everybody wants.
I think that'd be fine. We've had a good discussion. I think my recommendation is going to be that we've had a lot of comments, so if you can incorporate those comments into the draft form, maybe have another draft that can be sent to the advisory committee for their review after you talk to Stan and see what comments of his you want to incorporate or not incorporate in the discussion, and then bring it back to us for next meeting for final discussion and approval if possible. Would that work?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
One last question I meant to ask you was this issue of it's not consistent with some part of the judgment. Do you agree with that, or do you look at that and there is no issue? There was an item that was brought up.
The storage agreement.
I'm sorry?
It was under the storage agreement.
Under storage agreement, yeah. That is inconsistent with a portion of the judgment, or part 3 of the judgment or something, right?
Overstepping the authority of the judgment.
Yeah, right. Is
Is
there
number
merits
5.
to that, or legally?
I'm not aware of the inconsistency. I haven't looked at it in detail, frankly. I saw the comment from the advisory committee about the inconsistency consistency of the storage agreements with 18.5 and 14, and I didn't, that's a one or two sentence provision. I didn't see how there was any
Inconsistency.
No.
That's what I thought, I just wanted to make sure. All right.
Okay, that brings us to item D, consideration of possible action to approve the proposed changes to the transfer request form. Phyllis?
Thank you. I have a red line in your packet, and these are changes recommended by the Watermaster Council, so I'm going to turn this discussion over to Craig.
Yeah, the Watermaster already lists all transfers as being all as part of the annual report, so there's a process for that. Over the last couple of months, the board asked whether we could or should record these transfers. We discussed that at the last meeting, and that probably was not a good idea, but we looked to see if some advice that was some written comments and input from the Mojave litigation would provide any basis to move in the direction of having a reportable transfer form. We tried to vet that as best we could with county counsel at the recorder's office. I can't recommend that we be in the process of the Watermaster having the duty to record these transfers. I think it's a bad idea. I continue to think it's not advisable. But we added a couple of provisions, notice provisions to security holders, that they would list out those notices and provide attached copies of the notices and the receipts of the notices by security interests. And then number 6, for permanent transfers, the parties agreed, this is our language again, not the Watermaster, but the party, to get some momentum that we expect this to be recorded, but it's your responsibility, not the Watermaster's responsibility, to be involved in recording it. We highly encourage it. We're going to keep a record of this here, so if anyone wonders what the transfer history is on a piece of property, they can come to the Watermaster and get that information. But I don't think it's advisable to put the duty on the Watermaster to do that. Frankly, we couldn't get a form of a transfer that we were comfortable was going to get recorded. And then if we made the representation, record this document, they go to the recorder, it gets rejected, then we're back in a suit that we recommended a certain form of that. So we're moving off of that direction. A couple of recommendations are in the red line to make it clear what we expect, but the duty is on the parties to do that.
Would it be similar to any requirements of stating, you know, a defect in a house when you sell it or something, you know, that you have to show?
Yeah. Oh,
Be
absolutely.
the same. So state law applies.
You're representing what the rights are with respect to the property. There's a duty on the property owner to disclose. I just think it's not wise for us to get in the middle of starting to record things and finding out that we're late to the party, that we've recorded on something that doesn't have an accurate history of property transfers of water. But yes, it doesn't relieve people of duties to disclose the nature of their water right on their property. Now that I said that about the language, I have to recommend a slight amendment of the notice under the security interest. I didn't think it was as clear. When I read it again, it says such notices and return receipts. I said, I think it should say attach copies of written notices to these parties and copies of return receipts. So with that slight amendment, I recommend that the board adopt this transfer form.
So the change would be under security interest or lien holders in the second line, we're striking out such, putting in copies of written notices.
Right, written notices to these parties and copies of return receipts.
So can you read it to us again, how you want it to appear? That's under security interest on the second line.
Yes. The whole sentence should read, for permanent transfers, please provide a list of all parties with a recorded security interest, deed of trust, or lien in such real property or in crops growing or to be grown thereon, and attach copies of written notices to these parties and copies of return receipts. Period.
Got it. And you're asking that we approve the updated transfer request form as we have discussed and shown on page 92 for agenda packet 93 and 94 with the red lines and with the wording you just told us, right?
Correct.
Well, I'll move to approve that as amended.
So move to approve the proposed changes to the transfer request form as shown on page 92, 93, and 94 with the changes discussed.
Yes.
Second that motion. Motion second by Adam. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Brings us to the administrator's report, landowner and alternate landowner representative election results.
Yes, members of the board, we have for you the inspector of elections, Mike Chapakny, has certified that the landowner representative for September 2018 to 2022 is John Calandry. It was a tough vote. Ran unopposed.
Oh, I didn't have to say
And
Some people said, warned me I should expect to lose.
And the landowner alternate representative for September 2018 to 2020, the primary representative is Derek, and I'm going to butcher your name,
Urosic.
Urosic, and secondary is Adrian Brecka.
Having on for another 4 years. Yeah, I bet you.
You know, it's been a challenge, but I've learned so much, and it's always a pleasure to serve the state community. I grew up where I live,
Thank you very much. And that brings us to rules of order for watermaster meetings.
This, members of the board, this item is, staff recommends that the board discuss the attached draft rules of order. The rules of order be referred back to the advisory committee for their particular input. These rules of order has to do with agenda, meeting date, time, locations, how watermaster meetings are conducted. And these were prepared through the Public Water Suppliers Steering Committee and were reviewed and edited by the administrative staff. So we recommend that they move on to the advisory committee for their input and then bring it back in October with any revisions that may be necessary and recommendation at that time. Well, we do have them here if the board has any, wants to discuss them or has any questions at the present time.
So the judgment allows us as a board to discuss administrative items that we can approve without a 5-0 vote. Would this be the time to start that discussion and include that within our rules?
I think that's a separate process, quite frankly. I think that this here just lays out some basic general rules for us to go on. And then we're currently working on the full administrative rules,
Okay.
and that those would be included in that in those rules and regulations.
But this starts talking about, I'm looking at it, it's talking about quorums and the order we take things. we've come up with a situation where if one member for emergencies can't be here, then we can't conduct any business. And my feeling is certain items such the approval of the agenda, the approval of the consent calendar, and maybe some other items as we discuss could be approved by a majority vote, which would allow us to conduct administrative meetings if that ever happens again, so that when all the public is here and everybody's here, at least we can go through the items. And actually, if we were flexible enough, we could even discuss the action items without taking action. So most of the meeting could be conducted without taking action on items that this board decides we can't take action on without a 5-vote vote. But I think administratively, we've been doing this a long time. It's been working really well. I think we have enough trust in each other to realize that we will not approve something without a 5-vote vote that requires that. But if we can start putting that into words, this would at least be a good time to start the process. What are your thoughts, Greg?
Well, I know it was brought up in our producers meeting that they definitely wanted something about placing matters on the agenda. That was one thing that was important to them. And there's a few other things that, but in looking at this, it looks like it's covering quite a few things to put some rules out there. And I think they wanted to make sure, which I did see something in here that about the advisory committee, making sure things go to the advisory committee, because since we understand the importance of the advisory committee being, you know, involved in the process, that they are maybe some of the things even being vetted in the advisory committee before coming to us. So there's a lot more in here besides what, you know, was brought to my attention to make sure this got discussed. So.
No, this is a good step forward. I just, and it's helpful for all this, for the public. But what are your thoughts directly about starting to look at what we can? What I'm proposing is that
Not
we
having
set up a process where we
mandatory
can
vote.
conduct a meeting with a quorum here, which would be 3 of 5, but restrict the items per legal judgment that we don't want to take action on. So like today's meeting, if we said that we could have a meeting, we could adopt the agenda, we could have public comments, we could go through the consent item, we could listen to the advisory committee, and then on the action items, if we don't have 5 people here, then we can discuss the action items, get community input, but not take any action until all 5 are present. And just looking through this agenda, we could hear the administrator's report, we could hear the engineer's report, we could hear the attorney's report, and the board members here could put items on for future agenda items, and those who weren't could put them on at a later time. And then we could adjourn with the 3-0 vote. If we do that, then that will, and it's only happened once, and it hasn't been a major problem, but it seems at this point, we've been working so well together that we could do this to do that. So if for some reason one of us can't get here, it's an emergency, we can't get our alternate here, then the public who comes, we don't have to turn them away. And we've done that once out of all the meetings we've had. So not a major deal, but that would just, I think, help the flow of the meeting and help us be more effective. That's my, we can start looking towards that. I don't have any comments.
Well, we did it once because I think Adam didn't have
It was.
An alternate.
Yeah.
Now we all have alternates, and my gut feeling is, I would like to see a quorum of 4, because we really have some diverse interests.
Yeah, and I'm fine with what the quorum is, and if,
Okay,
I just want to.
right, start.
More, if you want to start with 4, and it takes 4 votes for everything, or if we, I can't imagine that we have 4 people here that we're not going to get 4 people voting on the consent calendar, or that all of us would have one. Just so that we have the flexibility, so we don't inconvenience the public and the staff, and we get huge resources to get everybody together to have a meeting, and stuff happens.
My concern would be that because Dennis and I representing Exhibit 4, if Exhibit 4 was not present as part of that
Oh, I
quorum,
see what
I
you're
think
saying.
that would be
So you'd
a
always
real.
want, yeah,
We would always want somebody from Exhibit 4 at the quorum.
Okay, I got
That would
it.
be, that's fine.
So do we have consensus to request Wayne staff to start putting together a rule where, as we discussed today, that administrative items and a quorum could be 4, administrative items could be done with 4, action items would still take the 5, and if we could start drafting that, have Craig and Phyllis review it and bring it back to us. It actually, I don't know if it fits into here or other parts of the rules and regulations, but at least start working on that.
Well, there's 2 issues. There's the issue here with this, and then there's the larger issue of what's necessary for unanimous vote or not. And so, with regards to this particular issue and conducting meetings, it's relatively easy to make those changes if the board directs us to do so. We'd be happy to do that, and leaving what I was talking about previously, the bigger, more global issue on unanimous votes to future discussions.
So in your mind, and I see it now too, in your mind, one of them would apply to how we conduct our business, regardless if there is a 4-person quorum or 3%.
Right.
I see them as separate issues as well.
Well, I also see in here the need to arose items, so non-agendized items, and this is on page 2 of that, 3.4, may be added to the agenda only if the board makes findings that the need to consider the item arose after the posting of the agenda and there is a need to take immediate action at this meeting. These findings must be approved by a 4/5 vote. So we're already, using the idea of the 4/5 vote. But I guess what the main concern is that in anything that we do, because on there also the 4.2, it is discussing the absence of a quorum. When there is no quorum, any member of the board shall adjourn such meeting, or if no member of the board is present, the board secretary shall adjourn the meeting. So since we have that in there, that is probably where we can discuss this. But I think what the main concern is, we just have to make sure that everybody's covered in the people that we have here, that there isn't anybody left unrepresented.
Well, so public water suppliers, one of each of you, the landowners, one of each of you, the likelihood of ABEC position not being covered would be very slim, because it'd be either Wayne or Matt or somebody if we need another alternate. So 4/5, we good with that? Administrative items, quorum, at least to start drafting. Keith, and you're welcome to come forward and make a comment. And thank you for, you sent us the first draft and helped with this, so we appreciate it.
Is this on? Doesn't sound like it's on.
Is it clean?
Oh, maybe it is on. All right, got it.
I just, putting aside, I think we're mixing two things together a little bit in the discussion. We're talking on one hand about the quorum needed to start a meeting, and then on the other hand, we're talking about what it takes to vote on certain items. Putting aside the merits of those issues, I just wanted to come up and say I would appreciate it before the board took any action. If you guys want us to consider it, it would be good to have it, we'd need to have a discussion at the steering committee level first, and then we could.
Of course. No,
before you guys take any.
Yeah, this was just discussion, and we were going to send this back, so.
So that's what I thought. It was just that we were just discussing some ideas, and then in discussing what I have here now, that I would be discussing it with everybody at our meeting, and even the possibility of what we're discussing here.
Right.
And then go to the advisory, and then.
Something I heard earlier, just that a discussion we would have at the steering committee that is, a suggestion was made that maybe things on the consent calendar could be voted by simple majority. And while the stuff that we tend to put on the consent calendar is not controversial and probably could be, remember that the consent calendar could contain anything.
Right.
So you don't want to have a blanket rule that says consent calendar is simple majority, because then you know, you could put anything on the consent calendar after that, and all of a sudden it's simple majority for instance. But we can talk all about that.
Right.
Keith, doesn't the judgment specifically says what can and cannot be done that way?
The judgment says, what the judgment says is that everything has to be adopted unanimously unless the board unanimously determines that a topic can be adopted some other way. So I think the understanding, Chairman Paris's understanding is correct, which is you guys can create rules to have a different voting standard for different things. One other tiny tidbit, that thing about the 4/5 vote for Vito Rose items, that's probably a mistake in there. I should say it is a mistake. I can say that definitively since I put it in there. It's my mistake. That's quoting from the Brown Act. So the Brown Act actually requires a special voting requirement for Vito Rose items. I forgot when I tendered that we had our, I needed to go through and take another pass, because technically that would be a change in our rules. You could do it, but it would be a change in our rules.
Okay, but like I said, this is a bit of information anyways, and my whole intention was just to have other things brought up so that we're having a discussion about it, so that everyone will be able to say, well, consent items definitely from where you're sounding, because a lot of times boards will put things on consent items that probably should be discussed, and they get put on consent items, and I can see your concern about that, but definitely, you know, we want everybody to discuss it and look at these before we, you know, stamp it as okay.
Yeah, this is just the first round. Okay, I think we've had a good discussion. If we can stand.
I did submit a card, and I wanted to remind you.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Stan, come on up. I apologize.
No problem. We had a good discussion. This is Stan Powell, City of Los Angeles. The main comment I had is this document is characterized as rules of order. We also have a rules and regulations document. It was not clear to me, are these rules and regulations, are these something different? I think that impacts your process. I think if it's rules and regulations, I believe the water master engineer has a role in that. I believe before approval, there needs to be a public hearing. So wanted to point that out. My personal feeling, to me, it looks like a lot like a rules and regulation thing, but that can be worked out. Also, two other things I want to mention that have been raised in the discussion. The unanimous vote issue. I think the main thing, my memory is not always the best, but I believe after the canceled water master meeting, I believe that the water master acted. And I believe that the water master may have already said that approval of the minutes can be done based on majority vote. That did not pass.
Did not happen.
Okay.
I tried to get that to happen, but it did not happen.
And then the last one is, I think that Kathy was bringing it up. I do think there are some places in this document where things other than a unanimous vote is crept in. The water master is free to make that decision, but they're already embedded in this document, so you might want to have someone look at it and evaluate, is that good enough? Do we need to have a vote to expand this to be majority vote or not? Because it's in there already. Thank you.
Dwayne, what are your thoughts? Can we, is this, you said you don't think this is a document to change or to show what we can do with a forfeit vote?
Correct, and because I don't believe that it's a much bigger, far broader policy discussion that the board needs to have. And this is really a isolated piece of, and I consider it part of the rules and regulations, items that the board has approved into one particular document when that all comes about. We're doing it in pieces, and this is just another piece.
Right, but it seems if, in reading this, it seems this is the perfect place to put, if we have consensus,
Right.
what our quorum would be, what items could be adopted with a
And I guess,
vote.
I guess that's what I was saying, is,
Yeah.
is that we can certainly make those revisions in this particular area, but it doesn't really address the broader issue of all the other things that potentially could be forfeit vote as opposed to the unanimous vote.
And we can discuss it further, but I'm just going, Craig, your thoughts? I mean, this talks about the quorum, it talks about the consent agenda, it talks about all the items on the agenda, and it seems we have the right under the judgment to make a change. It seems that this would be a good place to, and it seems we have consensus to do something like that.
I think that's right. I think it's by unanimous vote, you're specifically designating those things that can be subject to something other than a unanimous vote.
Right.
And that's 18.1.2.3 of the judgment. So
And
I think it's consistent. I just think the conversation is helpful because by unanimous vote, you are agreeing that less than a unanimous vote will control certain things, and that's an important decision.
And by a unanimous vote, I would imagine we could change that. Or we could actually run it, and it would take, we won't go there, but
Yeah,
we can
let's
do,
not.
yeah. And I agree with Stan, if we go ahead and make those changes within this document, we should do it with a public hearing, so everybody has a right, because now we're affecting exactly what the judgment says. I would like to have a public hearing, hear the comments on it, and give us all enough time to take it back to our groups and make sure everybody's on board. But I believe we have consensus to move forward with that, and it would just be a better way to run our meetings in the future.
So this draft is going to go back to the advisory groups?
It would, what I would suggest, if, Wayne, you think this is appropriate, since you guys will be doing the work, Peter and Matt, is listen to the discussion we have, and Keith pointed out too, the routine things, administrative things, a quorum, those things I think we have consensus for, 4/5 vote. Action items, no, we don't want to have the ability to sneak things on the agenda so 4 of us can vote on them and leave someone out, and so we can make it clear that that's not going to happen. But the main reason is just because we've experienced it, let's try to work around it, and
Any public input at that time.
And Keith, thanks for your help in getting all this started, we appreciate it. Okay, anything else on this item? We're moving on to item 10, engineering report, Mr. Phyllis show.
This is starting to sound like a broken record, but we still are encouraging compliance with our meter installation program. 40 parties to date have completed meter documentation. We have another 21 additional parties who have been in communication with us and have asked for variances and are working, excuse me, working with us to have this be in compliance. But we still have a lot of outstanding parties that have not contacted us. It's difficult for us to know how many parties have not yet complied with the meters until we get contact from them and have a better understanding of if they have meters on their wells already, and if so, we need documentation. I think there's always been a little bit of a misunderstanding. For existing meters, our rules and regulations require that even if you have existing meters, we need documentation that those meters have been installed properly from our pre-qualified installers. So all meters, we need to document all meters in the valley, please.
What if they could be installed by a qualified installer, but still their accuracy not within the watermaster accuracy? How do you feel about that?
So then, at that point, you have options in the rules and regulations to calibrate and try to obtain accuracy in that way. Also, there is a testing procedure associated with that. If you are still out of compliance with respect to the accuracy, then perhaps if you can't resolve the problem, you can come back to us and we can talk again about a variance in your circumstances. But it really isn't fair to the other parties of the judgment that we have required accurate meters to allow other meters to be inaccurate. So these problems can be fixed. These things can be dealt with. And so we are just asking that.
But the mere fact that someone sent to you a statement saying that this meter was installed by a qualified installer, you said that's enough?
Well, that's the minimum. I mean, it needs to be documented by the pre-qualified installer, and those pre-qualified installers have the responsibility to test the accuracy. So they will tell us.
Within a year or 6 months or 2 years?
No, at the time of installation.
So that could be 10 years ago, or 8 years ago, or 7 years ago.
And so if you're documenting an existing meter, then that is making sure that it was installed to manufacturer's specifications and it's reading accurate in that. So that's the documentation that's coming back from our pre-qualified installers and testers. We appreciate very much the assistance of the Public Water Suppliers Steering Committee, in particular Chad Reed has been very helpful. Thank you very much. And making sure that this issue is addressed with the public water suppliers. We now have staff assistance. Thank you so much to Patty for putting together our letter. We wanted this letter to be straightforward, simple, and to the point. And it begins with, dear party, you are receiving this letter because you are not currently in compliance with the Antelope Valley Adjudication Meter Compliance Program as required by the judgment. So this is our attempt at reaching out to parties who have not yet complied with the rules and regulations. That's it for me.
Show's over.
Shows up.
Thanks. Any discussion? No discussion. We'll move on to Craig Martin.
Okay, we have first an update on the appeals. The chart that I handed out last month has been updated. It's on page 107 with another one of the appeals that was left off. We got notice last night that the Court of Appeal is requesting whether there's going to be oral argument. And I am not clear exactly what the nature is of the appeal that it's going to be hearing in November. There may be counsel here that can enlighten us on that since it obviously predated us. It's not the Phelan matter. There's no update on Phelan. But there is apparently the court is asking for argument and dates that are available in November with respect to the appeals that are pending before the 5th District.
Is that the AVAC BBK man?
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Identified.
All right, that's it. Any questions on the status of the appeal? And we'll keep that updated for you each month. Second is an update on the letters sent to pumping outside the legal right to do so under the judgment. It's on page 109 of your packet. Is a memorandum that my office did with respect to most, if not almost all, of the parties that received our June 9th letter. That letter was generated based on information that we had that people in the small pumper class were exceeding their allocation, in some cases significantly. We sent out that letter on June 9th. The purpose of the letter was to get a conversation going, a discussion to first clarify and get agreement about what the classification is that party falls in. In the memo, which I distributed in your packet for a couple of reasons. One, to update you on the status of each of these people. And secondly, to tell you what my strategy is and where we are and what input I'm going to need from the board in dealing with these situations going forward. The short of it is, though some of these parties are on multiple lists, I think one of them wins the award for being on the small pumper list, defaulted party, opt-out list. And if there's any other lists, they're on those lists too. This memo concludes that while they may be defaulted to any other rights other than those set forth in the judgment, if they're on the small pumper list, then they're bound by the terms of the small pumper requirements. We have had this conversation with council for at least 6 of the parties about the status of their clients, and have gotten a large sense of agreement that they agree what the classification is of them. I'm happy to go through these individually, but what we've done is the following. We've contacted council, had a discussion about what we believe the status of their client is, and then the next step is to begin a discussion about what the conditions would be for continued pumping. First, clarify and document what their pumping is, that it's in excess of the requirements under the small pumper classification, and then begin a discussion about how we can bring that into compliance. Nothing will be promised because it's subject to this board's input, but we are talking about metering production going forward so that we have a clear idea of what the situation is going forward. We want to be very, very clear that the replacement water assessment is going to need to be purchased. None of these, almost all of these parties are already part of the judgment. None of them need to intervene except for the first couple that I had mentioned on the first page of the memo. They're either small pumpers or on some list that brings them into the jurisdiction of the judgment. So my words to the lawyers representing these parties is you don't need to intervene, but you need to come into compliance. We need to understand what your production is and move forward in that way. I go through the individual phone and conference conversations I had with some of the parties, all of the parties, beginning on page 5 of the memo. And by the way, let me just note, another reason this is in your packet is I welcome any input about things that I've gotten wrong in the judgment or misunderstood that maybe not being applied correctly. I welcome any guidance from any other council or anyone else on that in writing or at the podium. I mentioned Long Valley Road LP as the discussion with council that took place on September 4th. I bring their situation to your notice because they are a member of the small pumper class. In their opinion, they never received any notice of the adjudication. Their first notice of the adjudication was my June 9th letter in their view. They're improperly, if they're on that list, they're improperly on that list. They pump well in excess of 3 acre-feet, more like 300 and close to 50 acre-feet a year for a wholesale nursery. So their request was whether I would consider shifting them, or whether I had the authority and power to shift them from small pumper class list to Exhibit 4. I don't have that power. None of us have that power. That power, to the extent it exists, is Judge Comar's, and I advised them that if that was the position that they were going to take, that they needed to bring that up to him directly. If that doesn't happen and they continue to pump, I'll be back next month with an update of the discussion with them and with the rest of the council, for the rest of the other parties about where things are. but I'm mindful that we may be going in the direction of enforcement efforts with some of these parties when they realize the cost that there's going to be in paying replacement water for production above 3 acre-feet a year. But right now, the strategy is initial meeting, get the classification correct, get the pumping information correct, begin a dialogue discussion about how they can continue pumping if conditions are met, subject to the board's input and obvious approval of any deal that could be worked out with any one of these individual parties. That's where we are. Almost all of the parties, one council asked if all the parties were on the memo. There are a couple others, 2 or 3 others that got notices in the last month and a half that we'll be adding to this list for next month. But I wanted you to have a sense of what we're doing on this. And that I'm not naive, I'm not trusting people to give me the right information. We will verify this and we will move forward with court action if we need to. And of course, if there's resistance on the conditions that we impose to go forward, we can always bring an action for injunctive relief from the court, and in that context get attorney's fees and other costs associated with enforcement. I don't want to go that direction, I'm trying to avoid that, but I'm not naive that that may be the direction it has to go in some cases. I think that's it all I had on the memo. Any questions about that?
Greg, I think you determined that they've never served.
Well, counsel's comment to me was that there's an exhibit at trial that shows that a certain percentage of the class members of the small pumper class had their notices returned. So I've been in touch with small pumper class counsel. I've verified the address of this particular entity that took that position, verified that they've had the same address since 2006. It's with the Secretary of State, and that every notice in 2009, 2012, ad nauseum went to the same exact address. So the burden is going to be on them to show that they never actually received it, or that it was returned, and there's no information that it was anything but delivered. So that's the update on dealing with some of the small pumpers. Okay, if no other questions on that, and I'll give you an update next week.
Okay.
On that. This is where my agenda. Let's see. The next item in your agenda is to update you on the motion to intervene by Mr. Selleck. The court on its own effort delayed that hearing to October 4th, so I have no update for you. I put the papers in that we filed with respect to that motion to intervene. I hope it's granted so that we cut the cost, and we already agreed, the board already approved their production right for new production, so I didn't oppose the motion, but I wanted you to have a sense of the effort that it took to kind of get this right. And to encourage anyone else that is going to intervene in the judgment, that it's going to be cheaper for them in the long haul to do it right from the start and to get counsel involved. So that's Mr. Selleck's situation with the motion to intervene.
Craig, may I,
Yeah.
for one moment?
Yeah.
Who picks up your fees on this? I had a specific phone call from one of the other 4 members.
I didn't seek them in this. I didn't feel it was appropriate at this point to do it. He filed a motion in pro per, representing himself. Let's see what happens on October 4th. But I thought that might be a little bit much for me to ask for fees and filing the motion that I filed with respect to Mr. Selleck. If something goes differently than I expect. If the judge denies his motion, makes more work happen, and that certainly can be in the spectrum of what we can ask for. Okay. The response to the Fair Political Practices Commission inquiry, I got an email on September 12th from Cynthia Fox saying that they considered us a public agency that had to provide a conflict of interest code. I have provided to you a proposed letter that I suggest we send out in response, that I don't believe the Watermaster is a public agency, and asking her to, if she has any questions, to further contact us. But the fact that there's a public entity or two on our Watermaster Board does not mean we're a public agency for purposes of the Commission's jurisdiction. And I'd suggest that that letter go out as soon as possible. I had a couple of edits to it that were brought to my attention by a member of the advisory committee that I think would be worthwhile including on page 2 of the proposed draft letter to Ms. Fisher. The bottom paragraph, about two sentences down, it says, the judgment creating the Watermaster, on the other hand, established a 5-member board, which 2 members represent private landowners' interests. That the word private should be struck. It should be just represents landowners' interests, because that's not technically accurate. We have some appropriators who, or some municipal entities that have a very definite interest on the board, and they're not private interests. And also I want to clarify in the second to last paragraph on page 3, that paragraph begins, although the Watermaster is required to conduct all meetings in compliance with the Brown Act, that should be modified, and council made this suggestion directly to me, and I think it's worthwhile, that we are only complying with the Brown Act by agreement under the judgment under section 18.4.11, and that we conduct all our meetings in compliance with that consent that is in the judgment that we agreed to. In response, this is not the first time we've gotten inquiry from the FPPC. We got an initial inquiry some time ago, and then this follow-up one, so I'd like to get a response to them. And if they, as I mentioned in the last sentence, if they disagree with the analysis, they can respond and tell us where we got it wrong. So my recommendation is we send the draft letter out.
So you want a motion to direct you to send the letter as drafted?
I would like direction.
With the modification you stated.
With the modifications,
Yeah. The agenda doesn't call for an action item, but I think we can, just by consensus, direct.
You can provide direction to staff.
Okay. Consensus?
Yes.
Send the letter.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it should have been an action item, but the letter is included in the packet, and my apologies for not getting it.
You're just responding to the letter that was sent to us,
Right.
you discussed it with us.
The last item is addressing parcels on boundaries of adjudicated areas. I got this inquiry via staff, and the question is, some landowners have parcels that straddle the adjudication area boundary. Part of the parcel is in the adjudicated area, part is not. In certain cases, the part that's not has the well. Is the well, can the owner of that property qualify as a small pumper with respect to that well that's on a parcel outside of the adjudicated area? And my reaction to it was, if it's outside the adjudicated area, we don't have jurisdiction over it. But I understand that may be, I'd like to look at that a little more carefully before next month and coming back with a recommendation. Because in one sense, these boundaries aren't precise, and it'd be much easier and efficient for the staff if any part of the property is in the adjudicated area, the whole area is in the adjudicated area, or they're going to be making these minute decisions from here until doomsday with respect to whether the well's in or out.
How do we know what the adjudicated area is?
Well,
Were there any surveys done?
It's defined, but.
Well, I know it's defined, but we're,
So it's an exhibit in the judgment.
right.
And I went back to the consultants who prepared the exhibit and got their GIS shapefile projected coordinates for that boundary. And that's the boundary that I've been working with and I've provided to staff. So that's what boundary we're working with. So that boundary allows for in the geographical information system computer programming, we can go in and be very exacting as to whether or not a parcel may straddle that boundary or not. So we can do that in GIS. Is that really correct? Or, is that just subject to a little bit of error associated with the coordinate system and the projection of the boundaries? So it isn't as if, so we can be very precise, but we don't know if we're doing it.
So I guess if somebody objected, if we said they were in the boundaries and they objected and they're right at the edge, they could do a survey themselves to determine that or not.
Yeah, I don't think it's surveyed.
No.
I think it's just, I think what I have is the most accurate thing there is, and that has a little bit of, yeah.
Oh, is it?
So I intend to bring back a recommendation next month on this.
If it had been the watershed, as Dennis has suggested several times, then we could be very accurate.
Now, Phyllis, if there is a well outside the adjudication boundary and hydrologically speaking, we can prove that it draws water from the adjudication area, couldn't that, you could make an argument that it is within the adjudication area?
I suspect you could. I mean, I looked to Craig, it feels like it's a legal thing more than a hydrologic thing to me.
Well, so long there is a partial,
Yeah.
straddling, like you said, the adjudication area.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to make sense that somebody whose well is 2 feet on the other side of the adjudication area is not subject to any provisions of the adjudication. And they want to qualify as a small pumper. And don't we want that production within the control of the court? So all those just tell me, let's be practical about this unless I'm missing something and people think this is clearly contrary to the judgment, that for ease of administration and for getting as much pumping within the jurisdiction of the court, that in that situation where a parcel straddles both sides of the line, that if any part is in the adjudicated area, we're considered under the jurisdiction of the court.
I think that's a smart thing.
That's all I have.
Good report, thank you very much. Number 12, board members' request for future agenda items. Anybody?
So it looks like going back to the advisory board, they, they suggested that we smush the plan. Remember that? I'm trying to find it.
Yeah, no, I saw that in their report.
Should we put that on the agenda next?
What is that?
The advisory committee on page 2, you can see where I marked it. Requested we put something on the agenda.
It's the very last sentence in that.
Is that on the agenda?
That paragraph reads, "The committee recommends an item be placed on a future Antelope Valley Watermaster Board meeting agenda to develop a strategic plan to guide its activities in managing the Antelope Valley Basin. This plan should include interim goals, 5, 10, 15 years, for example. It is also recommended a facilitator be hired to assist in developing the plan." I did not attend the advisory committee meeting, so I don't know for sure what this is about, but the preceding paragraph is about the groundwater monitoring program, so I don't know if those two are related or not.
Derek, can you make a comment on that? Yes, if we need to get on the agenda next month, or we will that?
Yes, Derek Jurasik again from the advisory board. I think when we brought up the topic and conversation of strategic planning improvement for the groundwater monitoring network, it became apparent to a number of the committee members, to a number of the committee members that without clear direction coming from the board strategic plan, it's difficult for us as a committee. We're concerned it's difficult for the administration, engineer, and council to know what the purpose, what the needs and desires are of the board and the representation they have. So it's an encouragement, or I guess even a statement from the committee, to look at this process that will give better guidance to, all the entities engaged in this as well as going forward. And I just, feel free to ask questions. I also say that there was a second recommendation from the committee prior to that above in regards to requests that they gave, the board gave to committee about administrative staff role and responsibilities. So they provided feedback for that, as well as give a recommendation that it be placed on the agenda as well.
All right, so can we place those on the agenda as
We
requested?
can. I'm still unclear about this strategic plan.
In what manner?
In water quality, you said?
No, I think it's encompassing all of what the water master represents, what the goals of the board are for a 5-year goal tenure. I think there's a number of private owners that were in that. Typically, a business has a strategic plan, as well as public offices, of what their expectations are, what their priorities are, and then being able to all of us see that, provide feedback, and we're all aligned with those. A majority of us are aligned with those, hopefully.
All right.
Adam, we've heard that, you don't have enough money to pay your bill. You've got tons of work that needs to be done, should be done, and wants to be done. So this is kind of an attempt to believe that this is the first thing we're going to do, the second thing, the third thing. Yes, that's important,
Like
but
this
it's
is the priority.
it's next year or the following year.
What we're looking to do with our priorities and where we're going to go from here.
So when we get these things that we've been working on, rules and regs, transfer and all that out of the way, then it can be directed to something to.
So it's a business plan.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, I was just clear. So it's much broader than what I thought initially.
Yes.
And I agree with the need for it, but the first need is to get our regulations completed, to stay within budget. And I think at that point would be a good time to start the strategic planning, but we're just fulfilling the requirements right now. And we've been through some strategic planning for AVAC and for other groups I'm on. It's an expensive process as far as time, staff, and facilitators. So I just think it's premature. I think it's a great idea. We're going to need to do it. But I think what we need to do first is to make sure we have fulfilled all the requirements of the judgment, and then we have to do that. I also think that it feels like, I might be wrong, but it's a push to get us to look at the safe yield sooner than later, which I think we all agree on, but we can't get there until we get through all the requirements we need to do according to the judgment. So my feeling is it's a good thing to talk about, but we're not there yet, and we should wait for 6 months to a year until we have all the requirements of the judgment out of the way as far as rules, regulations, and then that certainly would be a personal feeling. Thank you. And you can put it on the agenda, but we don't have the resources or the money to do it yet. We will at some point, all of our focus is doing the things we have to get done. That's what Phyllis and Craig have been focused on. And that's where I think our focus needs to stay right now.
And I agree with that, and I understand that. Derek, what do you feel about the advisory committee proposing this priority list in one of your meetings? As a jumping off point, whether it's 3 or 4 months from now, or 6 months from now?
Yeah, I'm going to be a little cautious here, but I don't speak for the entire committee. And so I'll speak for coming up in a conversation that we did. I was part of the ad hoc committee that did meet with staff and with administration. And I think one of the takeaways I personally had is it's difficult for any administration to understand the task and order, and I know rules and regs are part of that, but so far as prioritization, how to communicate to all the different parties engaged without understanding the vision of the board and the expectation of the board. So as we looked at that, as I thought about that, and I think it came up in the conversation at the committee, was, and I think Safe Yield was probably part of that conversation.
I can imagine.
Robert, but I think it was more generalized than that. I think there was just an overall concern that we, as a committee, sit down and have conversations of what the expectations are, prioritizing ourselves, are we getting clear direction from the board? Is there a piece of paper or a document that we can refer back to as a committee to think about those things and then be able to give ourselves guidance and give feedback to the other public that have participating in that meeting as well as to our different representation.
I see that we're, at least for the foreseeable future, that there is a clear path in what we need to tackle. I don't see it as ambiguous as maybe some people do. As Rob stated, I see the need to finish the rules and regulations, the meter installations. We still have a lot of meters that are not installed. Clarify all the small pumpers and who needs to be in the small pumpers class. Go through this ramp down period. And then that's when really the adjudication and the management of the basin would kick in. And at that point, I think we most likely would have all these issues, the nuts and bolts of how to set the management of the basin or have done. And then at that stage, we may need to have some, I don't know if I would call it strategic plan or a business plan or something that focuses our energy and money on what is important and what we should do. I think we've done a decent job in identifying what needs to be tackled right now as we go, with the guidance of the actual judgment. The judgment actually kind of spells out what needs to be done. So it's kind of being used as our guiding document. I don't know why the advisory committee is unclear on what issues to advise us on.
Well,
I'm missing something.
Well, then I'm not going to speak for the entire advisory committee, but I may encourage the board that, adding your comments, maybe documenting those in some type of, written comments from the board, and that then we can pull out at the committee member meeting and just remind ourselves as we're going through these that, these are, because everyone brings the conversation to the table. We want to be fair and open in this, discussions, but it will allow us to keep focus as well, potentially. So that's my personal opinion. I encourage anybody else in the committee to come up and give comments as well. I think that'd be helpful to the board.
Okay. Just state your name when you get to the podium, please.
My name is Chad Reed. I'm also on the same committee. One of the things that I saw is exactly, I just want to first off echo what Derek just said. I'd like that to be documented. I don't know if we actually put that to a vote right now, if we'd actually have a 5-0 vote on that order and how you listed them. I don't know that all this is exactly how you articulated it, is what the board as a group feels. Obviously, as a committee, we don't take direction from a board member, we take it from the board. And that's one of the things that I know with our agency, oftentimes we get waylaid in discussion when we're going through different items, and we point back to our vision statement and say, this is where we're going. That has nothing to do with that. So therefore, we pull people back off it. I think that the biggest, I understand about the budget, and that was actually voiced several times in this, but we felt like it was such an issue that it needs to be getting put back on your plate, back on your plate, back on your plate several different times right now. That as you guys are going through the budget process, which is going to be relatively soon, that money could possibly be earmarked for this, so that not only does private side have goals and visions and things of that nature, this is how government operates also. And this is how we should all be operating, is so that we are not wasting money. I see it as a blueprint. If we don't all have the blueprint, who knows where we're going to put the dice? Who knows where we're going to put these chairs? Who knows where we're going to do something? I feel like many times, as great as the judgment is, it lacks clarity at times to really give us the detail of the drawings, right? You have detailed drawings that come out of it. That vision is that detail that we need, that you need, that the public needs, so that they understand, why are we maybe not going after monitoring right now that we're going after rules and regs? Why are we doing different things? Because everybody's marching in the same direction. There's no wasted effort. That was, I think, the biggest proponent or why we were so in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip.
Not to add any more to discussion to this particular item, but we are planning to bring forward for the board to consider in October a draft work plan and budget for the next calendar year. We don't anticipate action in October. We anticipate that to occur in November or December prior to that, but we will. We do need to address the realities of our fiscal situation with the work plan, and we can't deviate from the work plan unless we address the fiscal situation, so that each and every item that is requested or new work is being done, that there is some identification of where those sources of funds are going to come from. Because we have to either choose not to do one thing or do something else because of our fiscal situation.
Thank you.
Maybe we can incorporate, when you do that, a priority list, because number one, I think the advisory committee is like the backbone of this organization. I appreciate everything that staff does in engineering, but they take their time to give us good input. They've done an amazing job. I think out of due respect, we need to honor that request. Maybe not necessarily put it on the agenda, but bring it in when we talk about the budget as to what the priorities would be. Maybe in a month or so, Derek, we can get you that what you want, because I see why you need it very clearly. But it's about 30 days at least to.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea if we can, assuming we all agree on a list of priorities for the next year or so. And what do you think, Phyllis? Is that something that we could maybe put our brains together and say, okay, in the next 12 months, this is what we want to tackle?
Absolutely.
Is that what you have in mind, John?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Well, that's what Wayne's probably going to recommend.
Right.
Okay.
So it'll be covered within that.
Good.
Hopefully so, and if not, then in the next
Yeah,
couple
advisory
months,
committee.
we'll try to get that for the advisory committee. We did something today that I really like, and oftentimes where the advisory committee says the document speaks for itself, which I understand that, but we went by it today, line by line, and I think that is so important to the public to hear that, and I would like us to incorporate that every meeting, even though I would like to get out of here as quick as everybody else would. But I think for that 20 minutes or whatever we spend, it just lets the public know exactly what's going on.
I think that's really good.
And they're doing so much work, it's just almost disrespectful not to go over it line by line.
And the advisory committee has been great for us. So,
Priceless.
thank you guys for all the work you're doing. We always look forward to your reports, and they've been very, very helpful to deal with them. So, any other agenda items you want to talk about?
My pay raise.
got 4 years of the same pay.
We're gonna, John, we're gonna double your pay.
Okay. 2 days.
Okay, anything else? Meeting's adjourned.